I remember on that drive home, we were out in Western Massachusetts, and on that drive back to Boston, we were listening to the Huberman alcohol episode. And before the episode on alcohol that Huberman released, I just didn't know there was a world out there where people don't drink alcohol. I just grew up in a very, let's just call it for what it is, a very Western American culture of like beer and liquor, and everything's just part of socialization. And I just didn't know that there was life outside of that. And I didn't know it was could be considered a normal thing to not drink. I never saw myself as having an immense problem until I looked back at it, and realizing how much I was drinking throughout the week definitely classified me as an alcoholic. Perhaps I wasn't a raging alcoholic. Perhaps I didn't have any sort of daily functions disrupted because of it, but I was having enough that if I were to carry this on, it definitely could impact my life in the future, or definitely impact my athletic performance. Welcome to the T1 Determined podcast, where we bridge the conversation of type 1 diabetes and endurance. I'm Joseph Anthony Marcello, a runner, a weightlifter, a mountaineer, and athlete. As someone living with T1D, I'm on a mission to uncover and share science-backed information that drives optimal performance and longevity. And as a storyteller, I'm here to explore and share incredible feats in T1D sports physiology. Let's tackle this together. Today, I talk about my personal journey while training for and running my 2 marathons. As a T1D, in October 2023, I ran the BayState Marathon in Lowell, Massachusetts. And in 2025, I ran the Jack and Jill Downhill Marathon in the Poconos, Pennsylvania. Leading up to my first marathon, I discussed the life events that led me to stop drinking alcohol. 2.5 years into sobriety, the data is clear. My T1D management and athletic performance are fueled by that one choice. We're talking about more than just the miles today. We're talking about the mental fortitude and the machine precision required to normalize the movement of not drinking in an endurance culture. Whether you're training for your first race or just trying to keep your glucose in range, let's get to work. As we build this podcast from the ground up, your support is crucial for our continued growth. Wherever you're listening, please share this episode and others with anyone you think might benefit. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and X at T1D_endurance, on Facebook at T1 Determined, and visit our website, t1determined.net. Before we dive in, I am not a medical doctor. The topics discussed and the recommendations shared by myself and our guests are personal experiences and not medical prescriptions. Always consult your healthcare team and medical professionals before making any changes to your daily routines, management, or therapies. And now, let's dive into the mental fortitude required for running a marathon. Today, I am going to talk about my marathon adventures as a type 1 diabetic. 2023, I did my first marathon as a type 1 diabetic at the BayState Marathon in Lowell, Massachusetts. To walk you through the story, today we're gonna dive deep into overcoming adversity and mental fortitude more than anything else. I'm gonna talk about a little bit about how my blood sugars did, but there is a story here with my marathon, my first marathon, about mental health, overcoming tragic situations, and choosing lifestyles that can benefit my type 1 management, choosing that purposefully. I say that because, and we'll lead up to it, and I'll go deeper into this, but running my first marathon was the time period in my life where I decided to stop drinking alcohol. And it is coming up on 3 years now that I have been sober. And let's just dive into the lead up. of running the BayState Marathon, the first marathon, and then we'll get into the second marathon, which I completed last year, in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. And we can kind of cross compare those. So, leading up to the marathon, 2023, I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2019. So it's 4 or 5 years living with type 1 diabetes. Um, Dating my now wife, Katerina, at the time. Um, was living in Boston, at an apartment in Boston with a couple friends. My grandfather was 86 years old. He was my best friend. Uh, my grandfather and I, we always go fishing. We always watch movies together. That the August, so 1 year before my first marathon, my grandfather got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He got misdiagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So he had high blood sugar. I'll never forget Christmas Eve before, so I'm rewinding a lot here. He pulled me to the side knowing I have type 1 diabetes, and he said, "Hey, I don't want you to get scared, but doctors noticed my blood sugar was high. They're going to put me on medication for it." So right away, they put on medication for type 2 diabetes. Unfortunately, because I was confused because he had a very healthy lifestyle. Um, he was very active. He went to the gym 4 days a week, would always golf, always fish. I was confused because I was like, how could he have insulin resistance because he does not have that much excess sugar or carbohydrates? Lo and behold, my theory was unfortunately validated when he was misdiagnosed, and it was actually a tumor pressing on his pancreas. Um, and he was dying of pancreatic cancer. Most difficult time period of my life. I became his caretaker, between my grandmother and and my sister, and my family members. I was there a lot. I would stay over there multiple times a week, and as he digressed throughout the chemotherapy and the progression of the cancer, I was there more and more. And I saw my best friend, even though he was older, I saw my best friend start to deteriorate. It was very tough. I think this shows you there is more out there than just type 1 diabetes. And because you have type 1 diabetes, that does not stop other stuff in life happening. Every day I had to handle and manage my type 1 diabetes while then being there and caretaking for my grandfather who was passing away from pancreatic cancer. At the same time, my sister was pregnant with her first child, my niece. So my grandfather passed away 1 week before the child was born. So it was definitely a rough period in our lives. I was very much drinking alcohol as a coping mechanism during that time period. What I don't like about alcohol and type 1 diabetes is that alcohol has affected my blood sugar for up to 48 hours post consumption. So, yes, the following morning I'd wake up dehydrated if I was taking alcohol. And yes, it could lower my blood sugar, but it would cause more so fluctuations. Um, and then it affected my blood sugar for up to 48 hours after. And I was drinking maybe 3, 4 times a week. 3 times a week? 4 times a week? Yeah. Not excessively a lot, not to the point where it was a problem in life where people were telling me I was drinking too much. That was never the concern. I think I was just definitely during that time period using it as a coping mechanism for losing my best friend. My grandfather passed away in April, and that post period since he's been gone, so it was April 2023. I gotta say it was, like, the toughest time period of my life. I was supposed to go climbing in Alaska that May, and everything was lining up too close. And that January, I decided not to climb. So leading up to that point, I always had one mountain objective per year. So I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. My mountain objective was Mount Elbert out in Colorado. The following year was Mount Whitney out in California. The following year was Mount Baker out in the Pacific Northwest in Washington. The following year was Mount Rainier. And then I was like, I wanted to go to Alaska. And then that's when it halted. This was a time period in my life where I really started to, this was actually before T1 determined, I really started to learn about what sports physiology, health, and nutrition, how that can impact type 1 diabetes, and then how that can help me become a better athlete at running, at being in shape, and at managing my type 1 diabetes. Big difference was like I shout out Huberman a lot, but I started listening to the Huberman Lab podcast. And that allowed me to start reading books read a couple type 1 diabetic books, but a lot of nutrition books. And I started finding a passion in human physiology and then sports physiology as well. I noticed during my exercising that I was becoming a better endurance athlete. I was very upset with trying to cope with the passing of my grandfather. I was definitely very upset. I felt as if I was wasting my newfound athletic foundation on not going on a mountain expedition. And Katerina, my wife, and I, now wife, we were dating at the time, we just moved in together to an apartment in Boston for the first time that summer. And I remember sitting there being like, so this was grandfather passed away in April. My love and I were moved in together. It was early September, and I signed up for the marathon. That would be in early October. And I remember being alone. She was at work and I was working because I worked from home. And I remember being like, I got to do something this year. I got to prove something to myself. And I'm just like, what about a marathon? I run 10 miles during the week at one shot. I've never run a half marathon before. I researched all marathons happening, and the BayState Marathon was happening. I think it was literally a month later. It was 4 weeks, not even a month, a little less than a month. And I was like, screw it. No idea what that entailed. I was like, I think I can do it. I think I can push through it. I signed up for the BayState Marathon. I stood up. I walked outside. I've never ran a half marathon before, and I ran a half marathon. So I never ran more than 10 miles, and then the day I decided to sign up for a marathon, I just ran a half marathon to see if I could do it. And I managed my blood sugar during that half marathon in the whim of the middle of the day without telling anybody, without even preparing for it. I completed it of just having electrolyte gels with me. I think I just downed a bunch of sugar before I went. And then I ran and my sugar went up and then went back down. And then when it was going back down, it downed more sugar and it went up. And then it like ended in an okay area. I think I was around like 150 milligrams per deciliter. And I was just like, all right, good enough. I knew training had begun for that marathon. I knew I wanted something and I needed to overcome my mind. That's just who I was at that time, and I needed to prove myself athletically, especially since my grandfather was very much big into athletics. He was a huge athlete himself, and being an athlete took on a whole new meaning to me since his passing. I've almost wanted to live by his mission of what he brought to this planet with his athleticism through learning about my own athleticism. And I was never a good sports player growing up. I played lacrosse. I wasn't really good at it. I played tennis before that. I was okay at it. And it just like, throughout university and college, I never really played a sport, but I always loved health and fitness, and then hiking and mountaineering and mountains became my sport. So running always prepares me for the mountains, so I was like, "Why not a marathon?" Kind of a I mean, people work their whole lives to do marathons, and I'm just out on the whim being like, "Let's just sign up and train for it less than 4 weeks." But I say I trained for a marathon within less than 4 weeks. I had that foundation built. I did have that knowledge about how my type 1 diabetes handles running to a certain extent. So it's almost like I could just multiply that. I know my blood sugar starts to go down at that point after 5 miles. So I can have sugar every 4 so miles. Um, yeah, and I just used what I knew to continue. And in the lead up, training those 4 weeks, I went on longer runs. So I had another half marathon run, then I had a 16-mile run, and then I believe my longest run was a 20-mile run, and that was my plan. If I could do the 20-mile run, I knew I could do 6.2 more miles. We have an exciting announcement about the future of T1 Determined. We are beyond thrilled to announce that we are partnering with Project Insel Nation. Together, Project Insel Nation and T1 Determined will be constructing T1D backcountry adventures. This includes overnight hiking, camping, expeditions, and trips across the country, and with hopes of growing to across the world. A type 1 diabetes specific community outreach and growth initiative. Please stay tuned for future announcements, as Project Insel Nation will be helming these expeditions and trips, and T1 Determined will be capturing the content to bring you high-quality podcasts and documentaries. My sports physiologist at the time suggested that, because sometimes I was like, I hate eating sugar while on the run. So my sports physiologist at the time was like, first introduced me to electrolyte drinks. So this was an electrolyte concoction that I made myself. It was as simple as coconut water, salt, honey. That was it. And that's what I used to every couple of miles during training. When my sugar would go back down, I would have that. So I had it at certain stations. So for example, I would run 5 miles one way, 5 miles the other for my 20-mile run. And then when I got back to my starting point, I had the electrolyte concoction that I make, and I'd run 5 miles the other way, 5 miles back, and that equated to the long 20-mile run. So with me on my person, I had the electrolyte sugar. So that's like the Cliff Energy gels. That's like the goo gels. And then I think that was the only two things that I really had on me. I really enjoyed, that's the start of getting used to running with that. I run with my glucometer and I run with my glucagon. I do not run with insulin. I run with my continuous glucose monitor, so I could run and check in on that. But I would not run with my insulin, and I had my manual glucometer to just double check everything if I needed to stop. I was okay with stopping. I think for this marathon, it's not like I was after speed for this marathon. But I was running relatively fast. I averaged between fast, it's not too fast, 8-minute, 15-second miles, between 8-minute, 15 seconds and 9-minute miles. So between that range. So the training went very well. I learned what worked for me, and hydration. Running the first marathon was the first time that I learned about hydration. Um, Sidetrack back to life events. So it's like I got lost in thinking about the sports and athlete sides of things, training for an immense task in such a condensed period of time. We lost my wife, Katerina, her grandfather. We found him passed away a couple weeks before. I think it was right when we got back from a trip from Utah. And that was the third grandparent between the two of us that we lost within a year. She lost a step grandparent earlier that year as well. I lost my grandfather, and we were just going through a lot of loss. I remember on that drive home, we were out in Western Massachusetts, and on that drive back to Boston, we were listening to the Huberman alcohol episode. And before the episode on alcohol that Huberman released, I just didn't know there was a world out there where people don't drink alcohol. Um, I just grew up in a very, let's just call it for what it is, a very Western American culture of like beer and liquor and everything's just part of socialization. And I just didn't know that there was life outside of that. And I didn't know it was a could be considered a normal thing to not drink. Again, I never saw myself as having an immense problem until I looked back at it and realizing how much I was drinking throughout the week definitely classified me as an alcoholic. Perhaps I wasn't a raging alcoholic. Perhaps I didn't have any sort of daily functions disrupted because of it, but I was having enough that if I were to carry this on, it definitely could impact my life in the future or definitely impact my athletic performance. And after finding my wife's grandfather passed away at 84 years old from a heart attack, again, the death had nothing to do with alcohol, but I saw death again, and that seemed to be the theme of the year. It was 2 weeks before the marathon. I decided to stop drinking alcohol. My friends were confused at the time. They're like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Okay, I'm just gonna not drink alcohol for 2 weeks to leading up to the marathon." But in my head, I knew I told myself I was done for good. That was the deciding factor. So I knew I could do this marathon. I think the training for it was condensed into a 4-week period, but I had that foundation before, so it's like I was always training for the mountain, so I had the physicality ready. I figured out with my hydration electrolyte concoction and the sugar that I would be running with me. I knew that I could stop every 5 or so miles and take a breath. So on the marathon, Katerina would be meeting me, I believe, at mile 10. And the way this marathon, it was kind of like a loop. So she'd meet me at mile 10, mile 20. So I got to see her twice. So I could fuel up with a banana. When I saw her at mile 10, I could fuel up with a banana for the final 6.2 miles. And the drinks. Our special concoctions. The marathon itself would have water stations, aid stations, Gatorade stations. So I knew, and then I'd run with the sugar, the energy gels, and the little goo gels. So I knew I had enough with me, and that was really our plan. It was kind of systematic from the start. We really figured it out very quickly. The week before the marathon, we had the funeral for her grandfather, and I was reading a book at the time that was talking about injecting insulin into muscles, the different types of way insulin reacts depending on the type of the spot that you inject the insulin. For example, if you inject insulin into fat, your body absorbs it slower. If you inject it into muscle, it absorbs it quicker. If you inject it intravenously, very quick. So I was experimenting with the ways of how fast insulin could hit from my multiple daily injections therapy method. I was thinking to myself, and this is a mistake, and I don't know why I would do this, and I'm never going to do it again. It was at the funeral. I'll never forget this. At the funeral ceremony, so we're at the house afterwards. So, like, the reception, the food everywhere. My blood sugar was at 180 milligrams per deciliter. At the time, to me, that's a little high, and I was kind of frustrated with it. And I needed to give myself a correction factor. I would give my correction factor would be 2 units of Humalog. And I normally inject, like, on my thighs, on my stomach, on my hips, and sometimes the back of the arm. But I was like, I'm reading this new book and I'm in a suit, so if I don't roll up my arm, for those listening, I'm showing you visually, it rolled up to about here, and I was like, what if I just inject into the forearm, you know? Reality was my sleeve was only rolled up partially, and I thought I was injecting into my forearm. I was injecting a correction factor straight into my vein, and I knew it as soon as I pressed it, and I was like, "Oh boy, I just made a dumb mistake." As a type 1 diabetic, we come across this a lot where we do make mistakes, and it's okay to make a mistake, but I injected that insulin intravenously, and I knew it. And thinking back, I'm like, why would I even think about injecting into the arm? Why don't I just stick to the places? And it was just like I was going through a whole lot of mental status of like, like you're at a funeral. There was a lot going on this year. I mean, my body was physically training for a marathon too. So it's just like a lot happening at once. I inject that correction factor. Thank God it was only 2 units of insulin. That didn't affect me that much at that time. And I take a step back. And I felt like I stepped outside of my body, and I felt so dizzy. I felt like I wasn't in my body, and I was like, "Oh boy, this insulin is hitting me instantly." And I was in a room by myself, and I had to sprint out of that room, and I remember running to Katerina on the other side of the house thinking I'm not going to make it. And I just say, "Something's wrong, I need a banana. Something's wrong, I need a banana." I think I was gonna collapse on the way to Katerina. Luckily, I didn't collapse. There is multiple things that I think we can attribute to the human body that makes you want to survive. Number one is adrenaline release. Adrenaline probably just like hit me so hard that some sort of glycogen stores got released and shot into my body, raising my blood sugar that dropped instantly. So I injected insulin and it hit right away, which dropped my blood sugar right away. But then the adrenaline probably helped raise it a bit. And then the mind-body connection, my mind was smart enough to know something was going on and to know that I needed sugar right away. And within 2 minutes of injecting, I was sitting down eating a banana that had, I believe, like 30 carbs in it. It was a good-sized banana. And my continuous glucose monitor did not catch the dip and rise. It stayed flat. So that kind of confirmed. So my theory was that if the insulin didn't hit and I had that banana, my blood sugar would have risen. And if the insulin hit, my blood sugar would have lowered. But the fact the CGM just stayed flat means everything happened so quickly that my blood sugar stayed the exact same. It stayed at 180 milligrams per deciliter, the exact same. It didn't rise, it didn't lower. With all that interaction, I had the injection and I had the banana, and nothing physically happened on my CGM. Almost proves that it was a very quick down and up. Got on the call with my diabetes center. They said, "You're gonna be okay. Just don't do that again. That's very not good for your heart." I was like, "Okay, you got it. I'm totally not doing that again." It was just a lot. It was just a lot, from losing so many people that year to thinking about stopping alcohol, to just making this mistake and almost confronting death myself, to being in that mind where I was so dizzy out of it and think I was gonna pass out on my way across the house. A week later, I stepped foot on the starting line of the marathon. Zdeno Chara was on that starting line. Amazing. I got to take a picture with him. I got to meet him. It was awesome. Bruins hockey player, Boston sports fan. You guys obviously know that. I remember just having the weight of everything with me, knowing this marathon was a lot more than just about myself. It was about what I carried with me for that year, and it was about to prove myself that everything I trained for the mountains that I wasn't going to that year would pay off. I say I trained for the marathon within 4 weeks, but it really was that full year of training, of building that foundation, that base. And I've extended, like, my longest run during those 4 weeks again was the 20 mile to prove that I could run 20 miles. Katerina was at the start line. She knew exactly where to meet me at the 10-mile marker. And I had a banana before the run, and my adrenaline was so, like, hit so hard that I remember my blood sugar just jumped straight up to 250 milligrams per deciliter as soon as the guns went off. I was so nervous, and I was like thinking to myself, "Can I actually do this? Can I like what's gonna happen? Um, am I crazy for preparing for something so quickly?" But I'm just like, "No, the athlete in you are prepared for this." So I just started running, and for the first 5 miles, my blood sugar was high. And I remember on I believe it was right after mile 5, I really had to go to the bathroom. I run into an outhouse. I go to the bathroom. I run back out, and I continue on, and my blood sugar started to lower. By mile 10, I was back into like the 110, 115 milligrams per deciliter range, enough to meet Katarina and have another banana and have the electrolyte concoction and to take off again. From mile 10 to mile 20, I just remember having a steady blood sugar. It would like rise and start to lower because I was exerting myself. I'd have a gel, it would go up again. I'd have two more gels and it would like stay flat. And the blood sugar was doing good. I don't know, is partly because of the stress hormones releasing, partly because of the sugar that I had. I reduced my basal insulin, so I had less basal insulin in me. Um, and the course was definitely it was a flat course. The BayState Marathon was flat. And I met Katerina at mile 20, and I was like, "I can do this. I can totally do this." A mile 20 to mile 26.2 on a marathon is a totally different race. I remember at that point, my leg muscles just locked up and I couldn't even lift my leg. And I was just moving my legs forward, forward, forward. And it was almost like I separated the race into three different sections. The first 10 miles, the second 10 miles, and the last 6.2 miles all felt the same to me. And I just was like, I gotta keep going. I gotta keep going. I gotta keep going. And that last 6.2, my blood sugar didn't rise. It didn't lower. It stayed steady, I believe, around 140 milligrams per deciliter, which is great. Maybe that happened by accident. I had to remind myself that there is much more than just the type 1 diabetes at play here. I had to finish. I had to continue on. And I kept on moving my legs, and it was very painful. The lactate buildup was immense. And it was so painful to run those 6.2 miles. And it was so long in my mind. I remember not thinking I was going to complete it until I got to mile 25 and being like, oh, I got 1 mile left. And I crossed the finish line under 4 hours, 3 hours and 52 minutes. It's pretty good. I wasn't after speed. We went home, took a bunch of pictures. My parents were there supporting me. It was really awesome. I had a steak dinner that night, and I was just thinking to myself of how different that felt from a mountain expedition that would be days and days and days. And I had to think about the endurance of going through something for multiple days to, oh, this was only 4 hours, but this was a different type of endurance. I had to push through those 4 hours, and those were grueling 4 hours, but it was over after 4 hours. So, not that one is more difficult or easier than the other, it was just different. I had a steak and went to bed. Amazing. I think it was a great proving point to myself. I think it was everything I wanted to do with everything that has happened that year. Um, Now, the months after that marathon, I decided to continue stop drinking alcohol. And let's talk about a mental thing that happened quickly. The first It was that January after, so I ran the marathon in that October 2023, so January 2024, there was a situation where I had a panic attack. I actually had an anxiety attack. I thought something was going on wrong with me. It was just like an avalanche of thoughts, and I thought I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing, and I thought something either cardiovascular wise or type 1 diabetes wise was happening to me. And I went into the hospital, and to come to find out, it was none of that. It was pure anxiety. I went to the hospital for an anxiety attack, once I knew it was an anxiety attack, nothing was happening with me type 1 wise. I did a lot better with my mind managing it, controlling it, being like, "Oh, I am okay. If it's my mind, I can control my mind." I did not realize how much going stopping drinking alcohol probably did affect that. I'm not saying it caused the anxiety attack, but it makes total sense of when you initially stop drinking alcohol. So let's just put into perspective. I was 24 at the time. I had been drinking alcohol steadily since I was 15, every week since I was 15. So it's almost 9, 10 years of every week, multiple times a week, drinking alcohol. And again, it was part of the culture. Nobody saw me as an alcoholic because maybe I was engulfed in a culture of alcoholics. That's a different conversation for a different day. But just for the fact that it was consumed that much, and then I just stopped, of course, that makes sense for a couple months preceding, I would go into an anxiety attack. But what happened after that was one, I learned a lot of how to help control my mental health, focus on my mental health, focus on my mental well being. But two, months after I started to see the benefits of not taking in alcohol for my type 1 diabetes, I started to see my performance increase. I could run longer distances. I could prepare. That May is when I went to Alaska. And I was like, okay, I can climb as a diabetic in Alaska. And it was the correlation of I was starting to learn how to live healthier. I was starting to eat cleaner diets. I was starting to really start to optimize, I guess is the word, with in conjunction with stopping alcohol. And it just all came hand in hand. It was like a puzzle piece. And not drinking alcohol allowed me to perform better and directly, I want to say indirectly, but it really is directly affected my type 1 diabetes. I had better management of my type 1. My A1C started to going down. I had less fluctuations. I think the alcohol caused fluctuations. Even though alcohol lowers for the preceding 48 hours after intake, it would cause more fluctuations. It was this time period in my life where I really started to understand that I could have steady flat trends on my continuous glucose monitor, rather than spiking and lowering. I started experiencing less lows. I started experiencing less highs while in society and training. And then I could trust myself more on the mountain. When I was in the mountains, I could definitely handle the fluctuations more because I wasn't experiencing them as much. Last year, 2025, 2 years after my first marathon, I decided I wanted to do another marathon, the Jack and Jill downhill marathon, the Poconos marathon. For some reason, now this is the learning lesson. I thought that I could be okay with sprinting. I wanted to go faster. I don't know why I wanted to go faster. I have learned from this marathon that my body specifically is built for endurance, not for speed. But I was like, why not? Let's try it out. So I was trying to increase my speed during training for the Poconos marathon throughout the summer of 2025. So this is a year after I've been to Alaska. Um, Again, I was starting to gear up for my next mountain expedition, which was Kilimanjaro, and my training bout. So the Poconos Marathon was in September of 2025, and my training began in May of 2025. So I treated this as the pre-training for Kilimanjaro, which would be in December 2025. And I just like was sprinting 7 miles. My heart rate was up at 160, 170. What I learned from trying to go fast was that stress hormones release more and I become more insulin resistant. I did not experience the insulin resistance in my first marathon attempt, mainly because I wasn't going for speed. My heart rate stayed between 130 and 155, and that was using mechanisms within my body that was not releasing stress hormones, more on the oxidative. Um, methods, and it was burning glucose. It was not releasing glucose or glycogen stores. So training for speed definitely released those glycogen stores. I remember last summer, even though I had longer to train, I had May to September to train, I felt like I was burning myself out more. Um, the Poconos downhill, Jack and Jill downhill marathon, I also never took into account. So the course itself was flat over the whole 26.2 mile marathon. It decreased in, I believe, like 1,200 feet of elevation gain, span of 26.2 miles. That in theory is not a lot. It wasn't like it was straight downhill. It was really a really flat course, just slightly down, slightly up at some points. But I didn't think about how that would hammer my hamstrings. So it was hammering a different part of my body, that I wasn't training for. Um, so it's funny, the adrenaline on the day of my second marathon, September 2025, 2 years after my first marathon, spiked my blood sugar again, and I sprinted, full on sprinted the first 3 miles. My heart rate was at like 170, 175 right away, and in my mind, I'm like, "Can I handle a 175 heart rate for 20 plus miles?" And this was just uncharted territory for me. I actually ran the first half marathon very fast for my standards. I mean, I was running 7-minute to 7:30-minute miles, but each mile kept on getting slower and slower and slower. Um, there was a point where after mile 14 or 15, I stopped having water there because it was a small marathon. There wasn't as much aid stations, and there was a stretch of 4, 5, maybe 6 miles where I did not have water. There was no aid station, and that's where I bonked. The sun came up. It started getting hot out, and I kinda used the same. It was kinda so, like, let's walk it back before the bonk. What was different 2 years later was that was hydrated more, so my nutrition heading in, my plan ahead of time was more there. So I had complex carbs, massive amounts of complex carbs the night before. I stayed hydrated with electrolyte drinks that was 0 sugar, so like the Element, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and I was very well prepared heading in this time. But running, Katerina was gonna meet me at one spot that was about halfway through with an electrolyte drink and more sugar if I needed it. So I was running with electrolyte gels and pure sugar this time. Um, and because of the way of the layout, I was supposed to meet Katerina, I believe, at mile 14. Right after the half marathon, she couldn't get in to mile 19 or 20. So there was that whole stretch where I was not having water because of the aid stations. I was not having the electrolyte drinks, and I was pushing myself beyond what I was actually capable of with my high heart rate for running that fast for that long. I just hit a wall. Mile 16, I just bonked. And my blood sugar wasn't doing bad. Kept on, like, so my blood sugar would bounce from 100 milligrams per deciliter to 250 milligrams per deciliter and just keep on doing like a little bit of a wave. And I remember the stress hormones raised it at the beginning. It went down. I had some sugar. It went back up and it was going back down again. And it was like mile 16 and I needed more sugar. So I started eating the gels and I had the sugar and it was chalky, definitely chalky to mix the gel with the sugar. And I knew my blood sugar was okay, but my pacing was definitely not okay. And I needed to stop. And I almost convinced myself to stop just to check my blood sugar via glucometer for a second. And when I slowed down, I could not pick up the speed. So my mile time went from 7:30 to 8 to 8:30. And by the time I finally got to see Katerina between miles 19 and 20, I refueled. I was slowing down so much. That last stretch, I told you how the first time I did the marathon, I separated into 10. First 10 miles, second 10 miles, and the last 6.2. Those 6.2 miles, I slowed down to an 11-minute mile. For me, for training, starting off with 7 to 7:30-minute miles and going down to 11 proves that I totally bonked, and it was just a different it felt more like an ultra than it did a marathon. Um, I ended that marathon strong. I started running again. I think my last mile was like a 9-minute mile, and I pushed through, and I ended up coming in 5 minutes faster. It was like 3 minutes and 47 or 48. I mean, 3 hours and 48 minutes, with 47 minutes. I can put the exact times in the show note captions. But all that training to go so much faster, I only beat my previous marathon time by 5 minutes. Um, Learning lesson that a marathon is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and I tried to sprint it. Also, other learning lessons, everything that went wrong was not my type 1 diabetes. My blood sugar actually stayed good, but what went wrong with that one was definitely hydration and pacing and heart rate. I should have paid attention to my body, and I should have been okay with slowing down. I also learned that I don't want to do speed again. Training for speed made me more insulin resistant. It released a lot of stress hormones. I gained a little weight, which was muscular, which was fine, but not what my goal was. So in the future, I would rather run slower for longer distances, which I've learned to be okay. That's the kind of athlete I am. I'm just not a speedy athlete. I'm an endurance athlete. I'd rather go on expeditions that last multiple days, if not weeks. And then for future marathons, that I would rather go slower and for longer distances. I say that because I guess this is the announcement here, is that I am deciding to do a 50-mile ultra race. I am starting to train that. That will include, as part of my training, what I call a self-imposed marathon that I'll be running in July. And then there's a 50K, a 32-miler that I'll also be running in August, to prepare for the 50-mile race that I will be running in September. Um, More details to follow. Please stay tuned as I want to document this entire journey of running my first ultra. Um, Taylor Adams, Chris Rome, several other diabetics I have talked to, Adam Redling, people who have been on the podcast and have not been on the podcast or soon to be on the podcast, have run ultras. Roddy Riddle. I think as an athlete and my goal in my life, I'm excited to attempt a first 50-miler. I think that this is going to get me ready for the mountains. I want to climb Denali next year. Um, I want to climb Aconcagua soon, and I think this is a way to train me for the mountains. And I think this training bout, I've really gotten it down. I think the running, I've already started, and I've gotten to the point of I know one, I can stop and take time to measure my blood sugar, make sure I have the electrolyte drinks. But this time I'm actually starting to run with a pack, so I have the electrolyte drinks and water on me, and then I also have more sugar on me. I trail ran Mount Cabot last week as a big test. That was just trying to hike really fast up and then sprint down. So this is a new journey for me that I am using um, my 2 previous marathon runs as learning lessons for this ultra, because to me, this is a different sense of endurance, and I'm really excited. I think I fell in love with running. I really do like running. As a diabetic, it allows while I'm not running, my diabetes and my blood sugar levels to be stable, and then while running, it gives me something to focus on, my type 1, and I've run distances so many times that I know at what miles now my blood sugar does stuff. So say if I have a banana at the start of a run, by mile 5, that banana is either hitting or not hitting, and I need to have more sugar or not have more sugar. And then I keep my pace instead of pacing per mile time. I'm starting to pace in heart rate zones. So my zone is between 145 and 155. If I get above 155, I slow down. If I'm in 130 and I slow up to get into 145, and that actually has a different effect on my blood sugar. It allows my blood sugar, I almost anticipate my blood sugar to drop so then I can have that sugar, while I'm running. Now, this October, will be 3 years of sobriety. Again, I don't think I could be considered the worst alcoholic out there, but I also didn't realize how awesome life is without alcohol. I think it has allowed me, I'll just say this as it is allow me for a low A1C. I never thought I could reach such a low A1C as an endurance athlete on a carb heavy diet. It allows me mental clarity. My mind is completely shifted in the way that it has thought. My thinking process is completely different. And yeah, you can blame the creatine or the collagen, the magnesium, and just like all the other supplements I'm taking. But my fitness has intensely increased. And I attribute that all to stopping drinking alcohol. And I think I want to be part of the movement to normalize it. If you want to drink alcohol, that's totally cool. That's your decision, especially with type 1 diabetes. But just want to normalize for people who feel like they want to stop out there and think that there is not a world out there. I mean, there's athletes who don't drink alcohol. There's people in the science community who don't drink alcohol. I was very much worried about how society viewed me. And at first, because I was surrounded in that culture, I got more judgment for stopping than I did praise. I had more close friends, most close family members say, "Why are you doing that? That's stupid." Even today, I still get that sometimes, rather than trying to help me through it. And I realize it's more out of their own self-perception of themselves as opposed to at me, and I've learned to overcome that, and I'm okay being surrounded by it. And I just wanna be part of the movement to normalize not drinking alcohol, especially for sports performance and especially for type 1 diabetes management. I have lots of friends now. Some drink, some don't, and they're all okay with me not drinking. So I made it the norm, and I wanna be part of the mission to make it the norm. Um, it's helped me run marathons and train for this ultra. So today we went over a lot, some details about type 1 diabetes, a lot about mental fortitude. Since that anxiety attack, I've definitely worked a lot on my mental health. Um, I have my own spiritual prayer ritual, that I pray to God. I have my own meditation. I have my own way of going into nature, my own form of exercise that allows me to focus on myself and on my consciousness. And I do truly believe focusing on myself allows me to be the best version of myself, and I can then be the best version of myself to other people. So I do believe focusing on yourself is a selfless act because then you can be there for other people. And I am trying my hardest to be there for my family and my loved ones because I do love them very dearly. And every day I try to better myself, and that includes not drinking alcohol. I think at the end of the day, it's bettering myself. I am very happy with my athletic performance. I'm very happy with my health. I'm very happy with my relationships at the moment. And whatever your goal is, whatever you want to do as a type 1 diabetic and as an athlete, I just encourage you to look at all the avenues to get there. Write down what your roadmap looks like and how a plan that can take time, because I mean, it takes time. It was a very difficult first year of not drinking alcohol, socially, physically. Like I said, I went into an anxiety attack and a panic attack months later, and that was directly contributed to not drinking alcohol anymore after my body was so used to it for almost 10 years. And I didn't realize that till after the fact, 'cause hindsight's always 20/20. Um, but yeah, that with the marathons, I hope I was able to debrief enough about type 1 diabetes management and the marathons. Please let me know if you have any further questions. As I'm training for this ultra marathon, I am definitely planning to release more information, and we're hoping to get as much documentation about this. Because again, I'm not claiming to be the first type 1 diabetic to run a 50-mile race, but I want to bring light to it, and I want to bring science, and I want to bring data to it. One, because I think it's cool, but two, that's part of the mission is I think education is power. So everything I learned throughout this process, I will share with you, and we will continue to find out what other type 1 diabetics learn about their own specific sports and goals, and share that with you as well. So we can build this knowledge base together. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for listening to my story today. I hope you found this information valuable. Sobriety hasn't just changed my T1D management and athletic pursuits. It's changed how I show up for myself and my loved ones every day. Remember, T1D management is not just about the numbers. It's about the mental fortitude to choose your own path. Whether you're training for a marathon or just managing the day-to-day trends, keep your focus dialed in. For all our content, please visit t1determined.net. Connect with us on social media. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and X at T1D_endurance and Facebook at T1Determined. Until next time, keep pushing your limits. I hope this helps. Stay strong, stay determined. T1 Determined.